Well, hello, 4C students. This is Pastor Harris. I know it's been a little while since I have met with a lot of you, and some of you have been waiting for a video lesson, and I was supposed to get that up to you a week or two ago, and it's just taken me a little while to get myself set up for that, but here we are. And so what I'm going to be doing, hopefully, is once a week at least, I'll be posting these videos for you guys, not just for the chess elective, but also for the after school club, so that you guys can continue to learn. And I think even doing it this way, if you're focused, I think you'll even learn more than you did when you were actually in class. Because a lot of times in class, some of you are goofing off and missing key concepts. And so I'm going to go back to the basics, start at the beginning, and I'm going to fill in gaps that I see that many of you have when I look at your games. And so today's lesson is going to be about the ABCs of the opening. And I say it's part one because if I were to go through all the ABCs of the opening and then expand on opening principles that some of you have not grasped yet, then I think it would just be way too long and start to get boring. And so I want to keep these short and simple. And so I'll just do it in different parts. So this is part one, the ABCs of the opening. Now I know what you're thinking. A lot of you are like, oh, not the ABCs of the opening again. Activate your pieces, be safe with the king, control the center. Well, yes, I've said that, and I know you've heard me say that. But when I look at most of your games, I don't see you using those principles. And so it's making me wonder if there's some gaps there, if you really understand what it means. So I'm rephrasing and revising what these ABCs stand for, okay? So this is new for you. You haven't heard me say these things before. So what are the ABCs of the opening? Well, first of all, you want to advance your pawns to control the center and activate the back row. All right, so now A has two different A's. It's advancing pawns and activating the back row. You need to know which pawns to advance. You need to know what it looks like to activate the back row. What are the favorite squares of the pieces on the back row? Okay. Secondly, B stands for be safe, right? Be safe with your king. Now you heard me say that, but I'm adding be safe with your king and everything. I see a lot of you giving pieces away. You're making bad trades and losing material in the exchange, or you're just leaving pieces hanging and losing material for free. And that's not good. And so I want to teach you guys how to keep your eyes open to make sure you're not losing material and to keep your king very safe. You know, it should be castling by the 11th, 12th move or so. Okay, and what does the C stand for? Control the center. Yes, we've said that, but it stands for capture material. And this is my way of just helping you understand when to make trades, when to go after pieces. Like, are you winning by capturing that pawn or capturing that knight or that bishop, or are you actually losing in the exchange because of what you end up with? And so these three principles will probably take at least 3 videos, maybe more. And so I want to start with the first part, advance pawns to control the center and activate the back row. In fact, this video is just going to be about advancing pawns, and I'll do a second one about activating the back row. Okay, so let's take a look at what this means. Which pawn should we advance? Okay, so what we have here is a chessboard. This is on chess.com analysis board, and I just want to use this to help you understand some things. We said advance pawns to control the center. And so even before I talk about what that looks like, I just want to review what the center is. Okay, so I'm going to clear this board. Okay, and you have these 4 squares right here, E4, D4, E5, and D5. That is the center. When people talk about the center in chess, that's what they're talking about. We've come to refer to it as the inner center because you can't get any more central on the board than this. You can see how the board is divided in 2 halves, right? Going this way, going this way. You got you know, the A through D squares, and then the E through H, you know, squares, and then you got this side here and this side, you know, 64 squares, right? It's so cool to see chessboards and the patterns that you can see on the board, since you got 4 different quadrants here. You got a central board. So that's the inner center right here. But then you can think of the expanded center as these squares. Now we're going to have a whole lesson on what does it look like to control the center. But so this is also sometimes thought of as the center, or their central squares. This is the inmost center, and this is the outer center, right? And so we said advance your pawns to control the center. So really what that looks like is very simple. Let's say we're starting up a game. It means you're going to advance your E4 pawn, right? Or maybe you advance your, let's go back to this analysis board here. So you're talking about your E4 pawn or your D4 pawn. You could even, some people might want to start with E3 or D3. And so let me explain. These are your central pawns, right? So what I'm saying when I say advance pawns to control the center is that you want to advance a pawn in such a way that it's either in the center of the board. See this? It's in the center of the board. And it also, it fights for the center, right? This is a square in the outer center, but this is a square in the inner center. So it's fighting for the center. And some people, on their second move, we're not even going to move for black here, is they bring out D4, right? Now look, you're really fighting for the center. Look at how these pawns control these squares here, all right? And so now, not only are these 2 pawns working together to control the inner center, but they're controlling the outer part of the center as well. And so that's really strong. And so when I say advance pawns to control the center, I mean you should move pawns in such a way that they have some influence on the center. Some of you are moving random pawns, you know, like I've seen this kind of a thing, right? And you just will keep going down the board or something crazy like that. And it's just like, what are you doing? You shouldn't do that. Some of you might even take with your rook there and then lose a rook. So, and then you just start, all right, well, let's try this pawn, and then, or let's try this pawn. You know, you're just moving them randomly. And I don't want you to do that. I want you to understand what it looks like to advance pawns in order to control the center. So sometimes for a first move, you may see something like this, C4. All right, that's not a central pawn. It is in the outer center of the board, but notice how it's still fighting for a center square. And so that's a common and popular opening. Now, yeah, you could, I guess, do the same thing with your with going F4 here. And it's also fighting for central square. Something like this doesn't really fight for the center. This doesn't fight for the center. This move doesn't fight for the center. And so there's a lot of different moves you can make. And I would say your best are going to be E4, D4, maybe C4. There's some other things that people do. For example, people sometimes will play B3 here. And then on their next move, they will play, they'll fianchetto their bishop. And so that they'll play that bishop to B2 move. And so the reason that they advanced this pawn was so that they could control the center with the bishop like that. So when I say advance pawns to control the center, even though this pawn isn't controlling the center, it's making space for something on the back row to get to a place where it can control the center. And so we'll come back to that in a second. So sometimes you might have, you know, E4, E5, and then maybe someone will, they don't want to challenge in the center right away like that. And so they'll just go d3. And now the problem with this move is now this bishop can't get out on this diagonal. And so maybe he'll, oops, what happened there? Maybe he'll come out and protect that pawn, and then we'll see something like g3. Maybe he'll bring another knight out, and then the bishop moves this way. So he can, he's still blocked by the pawn, the central pawn here, but this is a decent setup. And so sometimes, so the point is that the reason that this pawn moved was so that the bishop could get to a square where it can control the center. So this is what I'm saying. When you advance your pawns in the opening of the game, do it in such a way so as to be able to control and fight for the center. That means to have a piece in the center, a pawn in the center, or a piece or pawn fighting for the center. All right, so what we're going to do is, and whatever you do, don't just move pawns randomly. Have a purpose for moving your pawns. All right, now, so what we're going to do, we're going to look at, and even before I get in, start looking at your games, I want to say for those of you who are just really still beginning, even some of you who are more advanced, you guys should probably just stick with one of two openings, e4, like this, or d4, and then just start developing the rest of your pieces, activating that back row. Okay. All right. So we're going to look at this principle in action in a couple of common openings. So let me get board set up for that. Okay, we're going to look at two openings that you guys can learn. And let's get this here. This is a lesson that I created that I'll probably share with you guys on Lichess at some point. But this first one sometimes is referred to as the Spanish opening, or it's the Ruy Lopez opening. And let's just walk through it. All right, so you have e4. Like I said, start with e4 or d4. Well, this is a great move. It's a pawn that controls the center, and it also lets out a bishop, okay? Black's response is often e5, and same thing, fighting for the center, letting out a bishop, right? Then you got knight to f3. Now we're gonna keep going just until we, to see pawn advances, because I want you to understand the purpose of the pawn advances, okay? All right, here's another pawn advance. Why? Why did this pawn advance? It lets out a bishop and it protects a pawn that's being attacked and undefended, right? And so you're doing two things there: letting out a piece, fighting for the center, defending the center. All right. Another pawn advance. Why? Letting out a bishop and protecting a piece that's only protected once, and not even that really because of the pin on the knight. And so we'll talk about that in another lesson. All right, so that's the beginning of an opening called the Ruy Lopez opening, right? Just to show you the point of the pawn moves. Okay, let's go through the beginning of another opening called the Gioco Piano opening, or also the Italian opening. All right, e4, very similar, same thing. Fighting for the center, letting out bishops, right? Second move, knight f3, still fighting for the center, but we haven't talked about that exactly yet in terms of activating the back row. So I'm going to keep advancing till we get to a pawn move. Okay, here's another pawn move. Everything is built around fighting for the central control, right? So this pawn move was to let out a bishop and also to defend another pawn, right? And Black's response lets out a bishop, right? It's already marked up, and protects a pawn, fighting for the center. Okay. Another pawn move. Now, what was the purpose of this one? All right. So it's fighting for the center. Okay. And while it doesn't let out, I mean, the bishop is already going to get out on this diagonal, right? It does allow a queen to come out on this diagonal. All right. And what else does it do? It's still, it's the knight likes to be in this square on c3 there, but the knight also will do fine on D2. And so I think that that's okay. That's part of what it's doing here. All right, so this pawn advanced with purpose, and it's fighting for the center. All right, castle, remembering king safety. Very good. All right, so now I'm going to look at a couple of your games. I won't be able to get through everybody's, or the video will be just way too long. So we're just going to look at it, and I want to evaluate your pawn advances and see if you're advancing your pawns with purpose. Now remember what we said about why pawns should advance in the opening and what their purpose is. We said advance pawns so that you can control the center with them and activate the back row, letting out those bishops. And so that's why you should advance pawns, right? So let's see if you guys are doing that in your games. I'm going to look at some of your games on chesskid.com. Okay, here's a game between 4C Josh and 4C Sam, ended in a stalemate, but we're not concerned with analyzing every part of the game, just want to look at your pawn moves in the opening, okay? This was a 60 move game, by the way. Wow. Okay, so we've got E4, E5, very good. Fighting for the center, right? I can't mark this board up. Fighting for the center and letting out your bishops. Uh-oh, what do we have here? We've got H4. Now, what does that do? Does that fight for the center? Not exactly. Does it help another piece fight for the center? Does it keep a piece of blacks from fighting for the center? And maybe, just maybe you could say it keeps the black queen from coming here to try to do some kind of like reverse scholar's mate or something. But really, that's probably not the strongest move. Okay, so we've got knight moves. We're just going, looking for pawns right now. All right, here's another pawn advance. Does it fight for the center? Okay, you can say, yeah, it does. It's fighting for this D5 square. All right, let's look for another pawn advance. Castling. All right, there's a lot of things to say about this game, but right now we're just looking at pawn advances. All right, so this move, it protects a piece in the center, and it lets out a bishop, okay? All right, now that rook comes up, and that really didn't do anything for white there by moving that rook up. But again, we're just going to look at pawn advance. Okay, so this pawn advance didn't fight for the center, but it is trying to protect a piece that is fighting for the center. Although that piece was already protected once, this pawn, I mean, was already protected once by the bishop and by the queen. It's only attacked by this dark squared bishop here. So, all right, and pretty soon we'll be out of the opening. All right, I think that's good enough for now. Let's look at another game. Okay, here's another drawn game. This one is between 4C Sieni and Think Magnetic Amazon. Thin Magnetic Amazon on chesskid.com. Don't know who that is. So, but we're going to go ahead and let's see how well Sieni and this other player does with advancing pawns. Very good. E4, D4. All right. Letting out bishops, letting out queens, fighting for the center. Ooh, not a great move by Thin Magnetic Amazon, because what they do is they just wasted a move and went backwards. I'm not sure. I think they were afraid that this pawn was going to come up and attack the king there. All right, so what Sieni does here is she's still in the center, but this is something that I haven't shared yet, and we'll do this in another video. With this second pawn move here, it would have been more important, I believe, to just continue developing, continue activating pieces on that back row. In the opening, if you can avoid moving a piece or pawn 2 times, then you should do that, unless you've got a really good reason for moving it a second time. And I think this probably would have been better to just continue activating that back row. All right, so that knight moved again. So that's not it's a sort of wasted move right there. All right, so, all right, Sieni activates, gets another pawn out. She's fighting for the center there. Oops, went back too far. fighting for the center there. Maybe this piece is helping this pawn come up and attack the knight. I'm not sure what all the thinking was there, but it while it exposes a king and continues to advance pawns, at least it's fighting for the center. So I won't criticize it too much right now. But again, you want to really activate that back row, get your pieces developed. Okay. So here's a situation where Sieni, for some of you who are more advanced, you should recognize here's a potential for an en passant capture, right? This pawn could capture by en passant. In fact, I want to just show that just so you guys can see what that looks like. All right. So white can go like that, and that's a capture, right? It's called en passant. We'll deal with that in another lesson at some point as well. Okay, so where were we? We were right here, I believe. Okay, let's see, another pawn advance. Well, now this time, this pawn advance is to attack a knight. So maybe you could justify it, but at this point, we are at our fifth move, and while white's development here is such that, you know, there's bishops that can come out and queens that can come out, and the knights can still get on their favorite places, but really you've only moved 3 pawns, and we want to get this back row activated. So that's in a different lesson. We'll talk about that later. So anyway, I just want you to understand, let's do one more game, but this time we're going to look at let's look at one of our middle schoolers' games, and we'll end it with that. Okay, this is a game between 4C Andrew and 4C Solomon. We'll see how it goes. Again, we're not analyzing everything, just how they use their pawns in the opening. All right, we've got a D4. All right, knight F6, knight C6. That's okay. It's not a pawn move yet, but it's fighting for the center, right? Developing. Very good. All right, now this is a C4 move. Is it fighting for the center? Yeah, this is definitely fighting for the center. It's not a bad move. All right. That pawn comes up. Usually when you see that, it's to fight. It's to allow the bishop to come out to fight for the central diagonal here. This A8 to H1 diagonal. And so that's okay. That's a good pawn move. All right. White decides to be a little aggressive here and attack that knight right away, thinking, okay, we'll make that knight run away to another square. And okay, so it's still fighting. It's in the center. We're not going to criticize that move right now. Forcing that knight to move twice. Now, what I would expect here is for white to continue to develop. All right, now white developed a knight to the edge, not the best place, and that's for a later lesson about controlling the center. Knights on the edge don't control as many squares, and so they don't like to be on the edge. But I think what white was thinking here was that he doesn't want black to come here and fork the king and the rook, and so just being extra cautious. That's not a threat yet, but perhaps he's just wanting to just be careful. All right, so we've got another pawn move. And again, here's an opportunity for en passant if you wanted to take it. So you don't have to. And so, but yes, that's a good move. It's fighting for the center. It's in the center. All right, okay, here's another pawn move we missed here. So this is fighting for the center, right? So it's a decent pawn move. White decides not to take, but to plug up that square. And this is now trapping this pawn so that the bishop can't come out on that diagonal. The bishop's going to have to fianchetto here, which we haven't explained that term yet, so don't worry about it. But yes, this is now the only problem is there's another opening strategy. We said be safe, not just with your king, but with everything. Is this a safe move for the pawn? No, because it's not protected by anything, and it's definitely being attacked. And so, and that's what black saw, and black took that pawn for free. Okay, now we've got, so maybe that knight move there just so that it could pivot and get to a different square to challenge. Okay, again, we're not analyzing everything, just looking at pawn moves. This pawn move here was to protect this knight. And so this knight is in a decent square that fights in the center. And so this pawn wants to help. This pawn is also fighting for a central square. Takes, takes, takes. Okay. All right, that's enough for now, I think. All right. One thing I see that's a struggle with being safe here, again, even though I'm not analyzing everything, is white's having a harder time castling. Black is castled, but on an open file so that that king is not very safe that way. And so, you know, it is what it is. We'll talk about that in a later game. All right, guys. So let's just, again, one more time review. Why should you move how should you move your pawns in the beginning? What's the strategy for moving pawns, and which pawns should you move? Okay, advance pawns to control the center. I'm going to ask you to stick with e4 or d4. Advance pawns to control the center, and then advance them to help you activate the back row, okay? This is for the opening of the game, the first 10, 15 moves until you get that full back row activated with your king castle, okay? Advance pawns to control the center and activate the back row. Stick with e4 and d4. I hope that's helpful. Will help you guys not make the wild moves. And so next video will be on activating. Let's go back here. Will be on activating the back row. What does that look like? How should you develop your pieces? And so that's what we'll do in the next video. Well, take care. I look forward to seeing you guys on Wednesday.